Margaret Lewis sat in her cozy kitchen, the warm scent of fresh-baked cookies filling the air. The old house, perched on a quiet street in the suburbs of Chicago, had been her home for over 40 years. The oak furniture, worn but loved, the photographs of her children hanging on the walls, and the collection of mismatched teacups on the counter told the story of a life well lived. At 67, Margaret had seen it all. She had delivered countless babies during her time as an OB-GYN and had raised 2 children, one of whom, Ethan, was now a successful architect. He and his wife, Olivia, had moved back into the city after living overseas for a few years. When Ethan and Olivia announced they were expecting their first child, Margaret was overjoyed. But even as she prepared to welcome her first grandchild, she had a nagging feeling that something was off. Olivia, who had once seemed so bright and eager to be a part of Margaret's life, began pulling away after she gave birth to their son, little Ryan. It wasn't the typical exhaustion from being a new mom. No, it was something more subtle. Olivia had grown colder, more distant, and her attitude towards Margaret, who had offered to help with the baby, became more dismissive by the day. "Thanks, but no thanks," Olivia had said sharply one afternoon when Margaret suggested lending a hand with Ryan. "I've got it covered." Margaret had only nodded, biting back the words she wanted to say. She had raised 2 children and helped deliver countless babies. She knew the signs of a woman overwhelmed, but Olivia wasn't overwhelmed. She was acting as if Margaret's presence was a burden, not a blessing. Margaret could see it in the way Olivia's eyes would dart away when she entered a room, or how her voice would grow tight whenever Margaret offered advice. Still, Margaret tried to brush it off. Perhaps it was the stress of being a new mom. But as days passed, the signs kept piling up and Margaret couldn't ignore them any longer. Ethan, too, seemed different. He was distracted, often on his phone, his mind elsewhere, especially when Olivia was around. Margaret wondered if the strain of parenting was taking its toll on their marriage. But what really troubled her was the presence of Ethan's best friend, Jake Walker. Jake, a successful business consultant, had always been a fixture in their lives. But recently, he seemed to be around far too often. Ethan and Jake had been inseparable since college, but Margaret couldn't help but notice how much time Jake spent at her son's house, especially now that Olivia had a newborn. Every time Margaret visited, she found Jake there, playing with Ryan, chatting with Olivia, and making himself at home. It wasn't that she minded Jake's presence, but something about the way Olivia interacted with him felt off. She was more at ease with Jake than she had been with Margaret, and that made Margaret uneasy. One evening, as Margaret sat in her favorite armchair watching the sun dip below the horizon, she heard Ethan's voice on the phone in the next room. He sounded exhausted, but there was something else in his tone, something Margaret had never heard before: frustration. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I don't know what's going on with Olivia. She's been acting distant, like she doesn't need me anymore. And every time Jake and Lisa come over, she's different. She lights up. But when it's just us, she barely talks to me. It's like I don't even exist." Margaret's heart sank. She wanted to say something comforting, but her instincts told her this was more than just the typical growing pains of a young family. There was something deeper, something she couldn't put her finger on. She glanced out the window, where the streetlights flickered on one by one. Maybe she was just overthinking things. Or maybe, just maybe, she was about to uncover something that would change everything. The next morning, Margaret decided to pay another visit to Ethan and Olivia's house. This time, she would see for herself what was really going on. What she found next, however, would take her down a path she hadn't anticipated. As she pulled up to the house, she noticed Jake's car parked outside. Again, Margaret parked a few houses down and waited. This wasn't the first time she had seen Jake's car here during odd hours, but something about today felt different. Margaret didn't know what she was expecting, but she certainly wasn't prepared for what she saw next. Through the window, she could see Jake, holding little Ryan in his arms. And when Ryan stopped crying, it felt like a signal, a moment of eerie calm that seemed to hang in the air. Babies didn't stop crying for just anyone. Margaret's heart raced. The pieces were starting to come together, but she didn't want to believe what her gut was telling her. It couldn't be true. She sat there in her car, hands clenched on the steering wheel, watching Jake and Olivia laugh and chat. It was like nothing was wrong. But Margaret knew better. Something was off, and she was determined to find out what. Margaret's mind raced as she sat in her car, parked a few houses down from Ethan and Olivia's home. The image of Jake holding Ryan, the way the baby had calmed instantly in his arms, gnawed at her. It wasn't just strange, it was unsettling. Babies didn't stop crying for just anyone. They stopped crying for their parents, people they knew and trusted. But not for Jake. She watched him as if in a trance, trying to piece together the puzzle she was starting to see. Why had Olivia become so distant? Why was Jake spending so much time with her family? And why did he look so natural with the baby? Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't seeing. After a while, she decided to drive around the block and make her way back home. But as she did, she noticed Olivia's car pulling into the driveway. Margaret quickly turned her head, not wanting Olivia to see her parked there. The timing seemed too perfect, too convenient. As Margaret drove back to her home, she couldn't help but replay the events in her mind. She wasn't a woman who jumped to conclusions, but the more she thought about it, the more pieces started to fall into place. Olivia's coldness toward her, the way she had snapped when Margaret offered help, and now this, Jake acting like the baby was his. Was Margaret just imagining things, or was something more sinister happening right under her nose? A few days later, the feeling of dread didn't subside. If anything, it grew stronger. Margaret couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed to know the truth. She needed to confront Olivia and get answers that would either confirm her worst fears or put her mind at ease. She called Ethan later that evening. His voice was tight as always. "Mom, what's going on? You've been acting strange. Is everything okay?" he asked, concern laced with a hint of suspicion. "I'm fine, sweetheart, but I need to ask you something about Olivia and Jake." Ethan's voice faltered. "What about them? I need you to think carefully. How often is Jake over at your house lately?" There was a pause on the other end, and when Ethan spoke again, his voice was quieter. "A lot, I guess, but he's been helping with Ryan. You know, since Olivia's been struggling. She's still getting the hang of everything, and he's been great with the baby." Margaret felt her heart drop. She had hoped Ethan would dismiss her suspicions, but his words only confirmed them. There was more to Jake's presence than just helping with the baby. Much more. "I'm coming over tomorrow," Margaret said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I want to see things for myself." The next day, Margaret arrived at Ethan and Olivia's house unannounced. She had a strange feeling in her gut, the kind that had never steered her wrong. She walked up to the front door, her knuckles lightly tapping against the wood. When Olivia opened the door, there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Oh, hi, Mom. What a surprise," Olivia said, though there was a nervous edge to her voice. "I brought some of that soup you used to love," Margaret said, offering the warm container as a peace offering. "I thought you could use it after everything. You've been looking a little tired lately." Olivia's eyes darted to the side, as if searching for an excuse to send Margaret away. "Actually, Jake and Lisa are coming over soon, maybe another time." Margaret's suspicions flared up immediately. Jake again. Of course, he was always there. And now, Olivia was using him as an excuse to avoid her. Margaret knew something was off. "Of course, dear," Margaret said with a tight smile. I'll leave it on the counter for you." As she turned to leave, Margaret felt a pang in her chest, but she wasn't ready to give up. She needed to see for herself, needed to confirm the truth. That afternoon, after dropping off the soup, Margaret sat in her car, parked a few houses down. She watched as Jake's car pulled into the driveway, just as it had so many times before. But this time, something was different. There was no sign of Lisa. In fact, Lisa's car was nowhere to be seen, even though Olivia had said they were coming together. Margaret's mind was racing. Was this just an odd coincidence, or was there something more? She parked on the opposite side of the street, watching the house through the trees. She didn't have to wait long before Jake came out of the house, walking toward his car. He looked relaxed, almost as if he had just spent an afternoon with family. Margaret's heart skipped a beat as she watched him. She had seen this before, a familiarity between Jake and Olivia that didn't feel right. He had been spending too much time with her son's family, and now she was starting to wonder if it was more than just casual friendship. After waiting a few more minutes, Margaret saw Olivia's car pull into the driveway. She was alone, no sign of Lisa. Olivia got out of the car, her face a mask of nerves, her eyes darting quickly around the street. She walked into the house, and Margaret waited, a sinking feeling in her stomach. What was happening behind those closed doors? What was Olivia hiding? Margaret wasn't sure how much longer she could sit idly by. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, but the bigger picture was still unclear. She needed more answers, and soon. But what would it cost to uncover the truth? And could she handle it if her worst fears were realized? That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, piecing together the fragments of what she had seen. The truth was out there, just within her reach, but it was slipping through her fingers with every passing day. The next step was inevitable. She would confront Olivia, but would Olivia come clean, or would the lies continue? And what about Ethan? Would he believe his mother, or would he choose to protect his wife no matter what? Margaret knew one thing for sure. The truth was about to come out, whether Olivia wanted it or not. Margaret couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in her chest. It wasn't just the suspicion of infidelity. It was the fact that, despite all her years of wisdom and experience, she was still in the dark about so many things happening within her own family. The realization that something was slipping through her grasp made her anxious, but it also fueled her determination. She couldn't allow herself to sit idly by while her son, her flesh and blood, was living a lie. The next day, as the morning sun cast a golden hue over the quiet suburban street, Margaret put her plan into motion. She needed answers, the kind of answers that would leave no room for doubt. She wasn't sure what she was about to uncover, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't be easy to digest. She picked up her phone and dialed Ethan's number. His voice was strained when he answered. "Mom, what's going on?" "I'm coming over today," she said, her tone firm. "I need to talk to Olivia. It's time for her to explain herself." Ethan hesitated, but he didn't protest. "All right, Mom, but just be gentle. I don't want things to get worse between you two." Margaret wasn't sure if Ethan was telling her to back off or if he was just trying to keep the peace. Either way, this wasn't about being gentle. This was about uncovering the truth, the full, ugly truth. When Margaret arrived at Ethan and Olivia's house that afternoon, the air was thick with tension. She could feel it the moment she stepped onto the porch. The house, once filled with the laughter of a young family, felt eerily silent now. The door opened slowly, and Olivia stood there, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. "Margaret, what's wrong?" Olivia asked, trying to force a smile, but it was too strained to be convincing. Margaret stared at her, unblinking. "We need to talk. It's time you told me the truth." Olivia shifted nervously, her hands twisting at the hem of her blouse. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Margaret said sharply. "I've been watching. I've been listening. I know what's going on." Olivia's breath hitched, and for a moment she looked like she might crumble under the weight of Margaret's stare. But then she took a step back and motioned for Margaret to come inside. "Please just come in. Let's talk," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Margaret could see the way Olivia was acting, uneasy, distracted, and avoiding her gaze. This wasn't the woman who had once been eager to become part of the family. This was a woman who was clearly hiding something, and Margaret was determined to find out what. They sat in the living room, and Olivia tried to avoid direct eye contact, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Margaret didn't waste any time. "Olivia," she said, her voice steady and cold, "I saw you with Jake at the park, the two of you kissing." Olivia flinched at the words. Her face drained of color, and for a moment Margaret could see the fear in her eyes. It was a fleeting look, but it told Margaret everything she needed to know. I didn't mean for it to happen," Olivia whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. "It was a mistake, a stupid mistake." Margaret leaned forward, her gaze never leaving Olivia's face. "A mistake? You're telling me that what I saw, what I know, was just a mistake? You've been lying to my son. You've been lying to everyone, and now you expect me to just sit here and let you get away with it." Olivia's shoulders shook, and she broke down, her tears flowing freely now. "I didn't know what to do, Margaret. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Jake, he was always there for me, always helping with the baby when Kwong couldn't be. And then one night things just happened. I didn't plan it. I never thought it would go this far." Margaret's heart ached for a moment, but it quickly hardened. She had no sympathy for lies, not when it came at the cost of her son's happiness. "Olivia, you let my son raise a child that wasn't even his. You let him love that baby, believing it was his, and you've been dragging my family through this web of lies. Now, tell me, is that really a mistake, or is it something you've been hiding all along?" Olivia sobbed harder, clutching her chest as if trying to hold herself together. "I didn't want to ruin everything. I didn't want to lose Kwong, and I didn't want to hurt Lisa. But when Ryan was born, I looked at him and I saw Jake in his eyes. I couldn't deny it anymore." Margaret took a deep breath, her voice now sharp. "You let my son believe that Ryan was his. You let him raise that child like he was his own. How could you do that, Olivia? How could you?" "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered through her tears. "I didn't know what to do. I thought I could keep it a secret. I thought I could keep everyone happy." Margaret stood up, her face grim. "You should have thought about the truth before everything else, Olivia. And now I'm going to make sure that truth comes out, whether you want it to or not." Olivia looked up at Margaret with wide, pleading eyes. "Please don't tell Kwong. Please, I don't want him to know." Margaret shook her head. "The truth doesn't care about your feelings, Olivia. You'll have to tell him. If you don't, I will. I'm done protecting lies. I'm done watching my son suffer because of your mistakes." Margaret turned and walked toward the door, leaving Olivia behind in her anguish. The truth had been set in motion, and now there was no stopping it. Later that evening, Margaret called Ethan. Her voice was firm, her resolve unshakable. "It's time, Ethan. You need to come over. Olivia is ready to confess." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. "What are you talking about?" "I'll explain when you get here. But make sure you bring your strength, son. What I have to say won't be easy to hear." As Margaret hung up the phone, she could feel the weight of the truth hanging in the air. The moment of reckoning was close. The storm was about to break, and there was no telling who would be left standing when the dust settled. The house felt unusually still as Margaret waited for Ethan to arrive. The weight of what she had just uncovered settled heavily on her chest. She had always prided herself on being strong, on knowing when to stand up and fight for what was right. But today, as she stood in the quiet living room, her heart ached for her son. The man she had raised, the man she had watched grow from a boy into a loving husband and father, was about to face a truth that could shatter his world. She glanced at the clock. 6:00 p.m. Ethan had promised he would be there soon. As the minutes ticked by, Margaret's thoughts drifted back to her conversation with Olivia earlier. The younger woman's tearful confession had confirmed all her suspicions, but hearing Olivia's words had felt like a punch to the gut. Margaret had always believed in family, in trust, in the bonds that held them all together. But now she knew the foundation of it all was built on lies. Margaret moved around the living room, straightening the throw pillows, dusting the mantel, her hands moving mechanically as her mind swirled with thoughts of what lay ahead. The truth, she realized, had a way of coming out whether people were ready for it or not. And though she dreaded the fallout, she knew she had no choice but to see this through. The doorbell rang, pulling Margaret from her thoughts. Her pulse quickened as she walked to the door. Ethan stood on the other side, his face etched with concern. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his voice thick with worry. Margaret stepped aside, allowing him to enter. His eyes scanned the room as if searching for some kind of answer. She knew this moment would come, the moment when the truth was laid bare. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything she had learned. "There's something you need to hear. Something Olivia needs to tell you, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it." Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. "Mom, what are you talking about? What happened?" Margaret motioned for him to sit. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was bracing himself for something. He had no idea what was coming, but she knew deep down that this was going to change everything. "Olivia, she's been lying to you. She's been lying to all of us," Margaret said, her voice sharp. "Ryan, he's not your son." Ethan blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean, of course he is? I'm his father. I've been there for him since the day he was born." Margaret took a deep breath. "No, Ethan, I know this is hard to believe, but Ryan is not your child. He's Jake's." Ethan shot to his feet, his face pale. "Jake, my best friend, how can you say that? I've raised Ryan. I've loved him as my own. Are you telling me that's all a lie?" Margaret's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "I wish I were. Sweetheart, I wish this wasn't true, but I saw them. I saw Olivia and Jake together. They were at the park, Ethan, kissing. And when I confronted Olivia about it, she admitted everything. She admitted that Jake is Ryan's father." Ethan staggered back as if he had been struck. No, this can't be true. It can't." "I'm so sorry," Margaret said, her heart breaking for him. "But it is." Ethan collapsed into the nearest chair, his face buried in his hands. The weight of the truth hit him like a ton of bricks, and Margaret could feel the pain radiating off him. He had always trusted Olivia. He had always believed that their family was untouchable, that nothing could come between them. But now, everything he thought he knew was shattered. I can't do this," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. How could she do this to me, to our family?" Margaret sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "I don't know, Ethan. I don't know how she could do this, but I do know one thing: you deserve the truth. You deserve to know what's really been happening." Ethan shook his head, his eyes glazed over. "I don't know what to do. I feel like everything's falling apart. I've been living a lie. I don't even know who I am anymore." Margaret watched her son crumble, his pain so raw and deep that it was almost unbearable to witness. She wished there was something, anything, she could do to take away the hurt, to make it all go away. But all she could offer him now was the truth, no matter how much it tore them both apart. The door opened, and Olivia stepped inside, her face pale and eyes swollen from crying. She looked like a ghost of the woman she used to be, broken and defeated. "Ethan," Olivia whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, let me explain. I never meant for any of this to happen." Ethan stood up, his face a mask of fury. Explain what, Olivia? How you've been lying to me. How you've been sleeping with my best friend behind my back. How you let me raise a child that wasn't mine. What's there to explain?" Olivia's tears fell freely now, and she took a tentative step forward. "Ethan, please, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen. It was a mistake, one stupid night. And then I couldn't go back. I couldn't tell you the truth." Ethan's chest heaved as he stared at her, disbelief in his eyes. A mistake. You let me raise a child that wasn't mine, Olivia. I loved that baby. I thought he was mine, and now you're telling me it was all a lie. Olivia fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose everything. Ethan stood frozen, his body shaking with anger and grief. But beneath the fury, there was a deep sense of betrayal. The woman he had loved, the mother of his child, had deceived him in the most unimaginable way. Get out! Ethan spat, his voice hoarse. I don't want to see you. I can't. I can't do this anymore. Olivia looked up at him, her face pleading. Ethan, please don't do this. We can fix this. We can make it work. But Ethan shook his head, his eyes cold. No, you destroyed it. You destroyed everything. As Olivia stumbled out of the house, Margaret stayed by her son's side, watching him slowly fall apart. There was nothing more she could say. The truth had come crashing down, and it had taken everything with it. Ethan looked at Margaret, his eyes hollow. What do I do now, Mom? What do I do with all of this? Margaret pulled him into an embrace, holding him tight as he trembled in her arms. You take it one day at a time, Ethan, and when you're ready, you'll find your way back. But right now, you have to heal. You have to be strong because no matter what, I'll be here for you. Always. The truth had torn their world apart, but as Margaret held her son, she knew that together, they would find a way to rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, but they had each other. And sometimes, that was all you needed to start again. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's world seemed to be in freefall. Margaret had expected the anger, the disbelief, but she hadn't anticipated the profound silence that followed. The silence that now lingered in their home like an unspoken truth between them. Ethan had barely spoken to Olivia since the confrontation. He had told her to leave, but that hadn't stopped the flood of emotions from pouring over him. Grief, betrayal, confusion, anger. He was drowning in it. Every time he looked at Ryan, his heart shattered anew. The baby he had loved and cared for as his own wasn't his. And every time he closed his eyes, the images of Olivia and Jake together haunted him. Margaret had seen the toll it took on her son. She knew Ethan. He was strong, resilient. But this betrayal, this monumental lie, had cut him deeper than anything else. As a mother, she wanted to shield him, to take away his pain, but she knew she couldn't. She could only be there for him, and that had to be enough. One evening, Margaret found Ethan sitting on the back porch, his face illuminated by the dim glow of a cigarette. The sun had set hours ago, and the air was thick with the humidity of an early summer evening. She stepped outside, her heart heavy with concern but her expression soft. "Ethan," she said gently, taking a seat beside him. He didn't respond right away, his eyes fixed on the distant stars above. He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling in the air, and then turned his gaze toward her. His face was haggard, worn from sleepless nights, his eyes filled with a sorrow she hadn't seen in years. "I don't know what to do, Mom," Ethan murmured, his voice raw. "I'm lost. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. I don't know if I can even forgive her." Margaret placed a hand on his arm, her touch tender, though it carried the weight of a mother's love. "I don't expect you to have all the answers right now. What she did to you, to your family, it's unforgivable. But healing takes time, sweetheart." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Time? How do I even begin to heal from this? How do I look at my son and not feel like I've been living in a lie for the past 3 months? "Ethan," Margaret said, her voice steady but firm, "you have to remember Ryan isn't the cause of this. He's just a child, and he needs you more than ever. What Olivia did is her choice. But you, Ethan, you have to choose who you want to be. You can choose to walk away, or you can choose to fight for what's left." Ethan's eyes filled with frustration, and he stood up, pacing back and forth. "Fight for what's left? There's nothing left, Mom. There's nothing but a broken family, lies, and a baby who will never look at me the same way again. How do I even begin to fix this? I feel like I've lost everything. Margaret stood up and walked over to him, her presence steady like an anchor in a storm. You haven't lost everything, Ethan. You've lost trust, yes. You've lost some of the people you loved, but not everything is gone. Ryan still needs you. He still loves you. Ethan rubbed his eyes, a pained expression on his face. I don't know if I can be the father he deserves. I don't even know if I can look at him without thinking about the truth. About Jake. Margaret sighed, her heart aching for her son. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, but you owe it to yourself and to Ryan to try. Don't let this destroy who you are. Don't let Olivia's mistakes define you. Ethan paused, his eyes locking with hers. He was quiet for a long time, the weight of his inner turmoil pressing down on him. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but full of resolve. I'm not going to let her tear me apart. I'm not going to let this ruin my relationship with Ryan. He deserves better than that. Margaret smiled softly, proud of him. That's the spirit. You'll get through this, Ethan, one day at a time. The next few weeks were some of the most difficult of Ethan's life. He stayed in the house, trying to make sense of everything. Olivia had moved out, back to her parents' house, and the divorce papers were quietly filed. Ethan hadn't spoken to her since that night, and he wasn't sure if he ever would. The betrayal was too deep, the trust too shattered. But what hurt most was watching Ryan, who now spent most of his days with Ethan, his cries more frequent, his laughter less abundant. Ethan had tried to bond with him again, tried to reassure himself that love was stronger than any lie. But the truth hung between them like an invisible wall. One morning, as Ethan prepared breakfast, he noticed Ryan sitting in his high chair, his little hands reaching for him. Ethan's heart twisted as he approached, holding out a spoonful of oatmeal. Hey, buddy, he whispered, trying to force a smile. Let's get you fed, all right? Ryan's tiny hands grabbed at the spoon, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan saw a glimmer of recognition in his eyes, a small flicker of trust. Ethan's heart swelled with bittersweet relief. Maybe the bond wasn't gone after all. Maybe it could be repaired piece by piece. Meanwhile, across town, Olivia was struggling with her own consequences. After the confrontation, she had moved back with her parents, but she could barely look them in the eye. The guilt weighed on her every waking moment. She had betrayed Ethan, destroyed the trust of the man who had once given her everything. She had ruined her own family. And for what? A fleeting moment of comfort with Jake. But now, she had no one to turn to. Jake had distanced himself, unable to deal with the fallout of his own actions. Lisa, who had been a close friend, had cut ties with her, disgusted by the lies and the betrayal. Olivia was alone. In the silence of her parents' home, she began to face the reality of her actions. Ethan was right. She had destroyed everything, and now she would have to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Back at Ethan's house, the healing process had just begun. It would take time. Time to forgive, time to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But with each passing day, Ethan was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find his way back from this. And as he looked down at Ryan, his little face filled with innocence and trust, Ethan made a silent vow. He would fight for this child, for himself, for his family, no matter what it took. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, and that was enough to keep him going. The truth had torn their world apart, but now, in the wreckage, there was room for something new to grow. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. Time marched on, and though Ethan's heart was still heavy, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Each day felt like an uphill climb, but slowly he was starting to feel something resembling stability again. The pain of betrayal was still there, lurking in the background, but it was no longer the all-consuming force it once had been. The truth had done its damage, but it had also opened the door for something new, a chance to rebuild. Margaret noticed the subtle changes in her son. He was still quiet, still lost in his thoughts at times, but the shadows in his eyes were less frequent. He was starting to come back to himself. Ethan had made the decision to fight for Ryan, to be the father the little boy deserved. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot. Every time Ethan held Ryan in his arms, a pang of sadness gnawed at him. The child he loved wasn't his by blood, but in his heart, Ryan was his son. And that was what mattered now. One sunny afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting on the porch, watching Ryan play in the yard. The little boy had grown stronger, his laughs more frequent, his energy contagious. Ethan had been through some of the toughest weeks of his life, but he was beginning to find solace in these quiet moments. He was grateful for them, grateful for Ryan's innocent smiles and the way the little one would reach up to him with those tiny hands as if asking for reassurance. Margaret stepped outside, a warm cup of coffee in hand. She sat next to Ethan, her eyes following Ryan's every move. "He's getting so big," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet pride. Ethan nodded, his heart swelling. "Yeah, he is, and I'm starting to get to know him again, slowly, but it's happening." Margaret smiled, sensing her son's gradual healing. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan. I know it's been hard. I can't imagine how hard. But Ryan needs you now more than ever." Ethan took a deep breath, watching Ryan chase after a butterfly. "It's strange, you know. I never thought I'd be in this position. I never thought I'd have to rebuild everything from scratch, but I'm trying for him, and for me." Margaret squeezed his shoulder, her voice firm but gentle. "Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones that lead to the greatest rewards. You've already fought through the worst of it, Ethan. Now you just have to keep going." Later that evening, Ethan found himself standing in front of a photo album, flipping through pictures of his life before everything fell apart. There were photos of him and Olivia, happy, carefree days that now seemed like a distant memory. He stared at one picture in particular, taken on their honeymoon in Italy. Olivia's radiant smile, his arm wrapped around her, their future stretched out before them like an open road. He didn't even recognize the man in that photo anymore. But then, as he turned the pages, he found the pictures of Ryan. The first time he'd held the baby. The first time Ryan had smiled at him. Those moments were real and they were his. And in them, Ethan found the strength to keep going. He wasn't going to let one lie ruin the love he had for his son, no matter what. A few days later, Olivia showed up at Ethan's door. Margaret had already warned him that this might happen, but Ethan had braced himself for it. He wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet, and maybe not ever, but he knew this conversation was inevitable. Ethan opened the door to find Olivia standing there, her face tired, her eyes full of regret. She wasn't the woman he had once loved, and she never would be again, but she was still the mother of his son. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you, please." He stood in the doorway for a long moment, weighing his options. He didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to listen to her explain away her betrayal. But the words came anyway, even as he tried to hold back the flood of anger that bubbled up inside him. "I don't know what you want from me, Olivia. I don't know why you're here. You made your choice. You made it clear what you wanted." Olivia's face crumpled, and she stepped forward, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I've been sorry for a long time, but I've realized something. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I never meant for things to go the way they did. I never meant to hurt you, and I never meant to hurt Ryan." Ethan took a deep breath, the anger still simmering beneath the surface. "You didn't just hurt me, Olivia. You hurt everyone. You lied to me and you lied to our family. I can't just forget that." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't expect you to. But I want to try to fix things, Ethan, not between us, but with Ryan. I want to be part of his life again." Ethan's heart twisted. He wasn't ready to let Olivia back into his life, not after everything she had done. But the thought of Ryan growing up without a mother, without both parents, struck him hard. He had no answers, no clear path forward. But he couldn't deny that Olivia still had a place in Ryan's life, whether he liked it or not. "You'll have to prove it, Olivia," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You've broken my trust and you'll have to earn it back. For Ryan's sake, I'll consider allowing you to see him, but that's all I can promise right now." Olivia nodded, her eyes filled with both sorrow and relief. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll prove to Ryan, that I can be the mother he deserves." As Olivia left, Ethan felt the weight of her words sink in. He wasn't ready to embrace her again, not fully, and perhaps he never would be. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. The future wasn't set in stone. There was room for healing, for redemption, and for growth. Maybe things would never go back to the way they were, but that didn't mean they couldn't be better in some ways. As Ethan walked back inside, he found Ryan playing in the living room, his little hands grasping at a toy. Ethan knelt beside him, his heart swelling with love. "No matter what happens, buddy," he whispered, "I'm here for you always." Ryan giggled, his innocent eyes wide with trust, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he would walk it with Ryan by his side. Together, and that, he knew, was enough. The past was gone, but the future was theirs to shape, one step at a time. Months passed since the storm had ripped through Ethan's life, leaving its scars, but also the faintest hints of renewal. The weight of the betrayal was still there, always lurking at the edge of his thoughts, but each day it grew lighter. He had found a way to move forward, not because the pain had disappeared, but because he had learned how to carry it. Olivia had made an effort. She didn't just say the words, she showed up. Slowly but surely, she started proving that she could be there for Ryan, even if the wounds between her and Ethan were still fresh. She didn't push for reconciliation between them, respecting the space he needed. She kept her distance while showing up consistently for her son. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness didn't come quickly, nor did trust. But the cracks in their foundation, once deep and jagged, began to heal. Ethan started noticing small things, Ryan laughing at Olivia's silly faces, the way she would sing to him at night when Ethan couldn't, the quiet bond they were slowly building. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and for Ethan that was enough. Margaret watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. She had seen the raw pain in her son's eyes, the loss, the disbelief, but she also saw his resilience. She saw his commitment to Ryan, to their future. She saw him fight for something worth fighting for, love. Not just for himself, but for his son. One evening, as Margaret sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan joined her, Ryan in his arms, the soft glow of dusk casting a warm light on them both. It was a rare moment of peace, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt that peace in his heart. "I never thought I'd get here," he said quietly, looking at Ryan. "But we're getting there, aren't we?" Margaret smiled, her eyes misting with unshed tears. "One step at a time, sweetheart, one step at a time." Ethan chuckled softly, nodding. "Yeah, and for the first time, I think I'm actually looking forward to what comes next." Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "That's all we can do, isn't it? Keep moving forward." And so they did. Ethan, with Ryan by his side, moved forward into a new chapter of life. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer defined them. The love they had for Ryan, for each other, for the future, was the new foundation they were building on. A foundation that was stronger, more resilient, and, most importantly, full of hope. In the end, it was the truth that set them free. Not just the painful, ugly truth that had torn their world apart, but the other truths, the ones that came after. The truth that love could survive, even after betrayal. The truth that family could rebuild piece by piece. And the truth that, no matter the hurt, it was never too late to begin again. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret knew that they were finally on their way to healing. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but with love, determination, and time, they could face whatever came next. Together. Always.